timekeepers. Thanks for stopping by the My Reader Minutes. For those that are new here, welcome. To all who have decided to join me on my journey, thank you and welcome to the Timekeeper crew. Okay, we are still talking about Love and Marriage Huntsville. I believe this episode should have been called Petty 101. And it has to do with the Scotts. Okay, Scott 1.0 and Scott 2.0. Now, as you already know, when it left off, they were at Lance's birthday party. And at the end of the night, or at the end of the episode, we won't say the end of the night, Nell felt overwhelmed. She made it clear to the ladies that she's kind of overwhelmed. She has everything on her. They had brought up, Chris Fletcher's real estate license being revoked. She explained to them that, it was her that got served, not him. He wasn't even home. She's taking care of her dad. Her dad is staying with her. She has 2 brand new grandchildren, and it's all like being dumped like right here, right? So she gets upset. She kind of goes in the bathroom trying to get herself together. Mind you, Destiny follows behind her and, wants to make sure she's okay. Kimmy follows behind her and wants to make sure she's all right. Of course, her daughter's there and they're saying, like, let it out, just cry, whatever, blah, blah, blah. This episode, it starts off with Tisha and Nell, and they meet at some restaurant called Trio. And Tisha invites Nell out under the guise of like, okay, we're just going to squash, whatever this is we're having. I think me and you can get beyond this. They want to mend their relationship and earn each other's trust, I guess, right? And they're sitting there talking, and I don't know. It didn't seem really genuine to me about how Tisha was talking to her. I didn't feel it, but evidently Nell said she likes her. I don't know. Maybe for the sake of the show, they're going to do this, but I didn't feel that. You know what I mean? In that conversation. Nell is grasping at straw. She basically says she was appreciative how Letitia went, I guess, to intervene when her mother was coming at her at the 80s party, right? Remember, I think Wanda must have said something about you are still going through something about whatever was going on with your mother. When your mother passed away, something between you and your mother wasn't right, blah, 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 blah. And evidently she was making it sound like that Nell has some type of guilt. And that's what, is going on with her or whatever. As soon as Wanda said that, Tisha gets up out of her seat and goes like, Mom, like you've taken it too far. My whole point with that is Tisha brought her mother or invited her mother for Nell and wanted that to happen. You can't make something happen or put something in motion for something to happen. And then when it goes wrong, then all of a sudden you're the savior too. I didn't see that as Letitia coming to Nell's defense. So I didn't see that. But Nell says, I appreciate you intervening and letting, getting up when your mother was saying blah, blah, blah. Okay, now, whatever. We'll go with that. So they talk more about, just trying to build a friendship. And basically Nell says, well, I think Tisha said, I know you don't trust me or whatever. And Nell basically says, well, trust is earned. And I agree with that. So they're going to try to not do baby steps per Tisha. They're going to go step by step and see how this pans out. Okay. So the next scene is Kimmy and Maurice, and they're meeting up at their properties that they are looking to, rebuild, revamp, what have you. And looks like they have bought something, I guess it's a well-known building in the area. It was an old radio station called We Up. Anyway, after it was a radio station, it must have been a church or whatever, but people still see it as the old radio station. Anyway, Kimmy has some ideas for it. She's saying that I guess she has a catering business, or she must be invested in a catering business, or she's looking to kind of like turn that into something like, having special events there and things like that. So they're talking about, how this is looking and how they're starting to clean up the building a little bit. And lo and behold, right across the street is the restaurant that evidently they had purchased maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, something like that, for one of the, I guess her name was LaChastity. She was a chef. She appeared on the show maybe a couple of years prior. And remember they did a taste testing or whatever. Anyway, I believe they're supposed to be getting that building ready for her. And it's a year or maybe a year and a half or whatever behind schedule. And I remember Kimmy, Letitia, Maurice, and Marceau had a sit down and was talking about, I don't think Kimmy was in favor of giving Marceau that job because he's kind of slow. Anyway, lo and behold, they're standing in front of it. As they're talking about the radio station, they turn around and Marceau is actually passing by and he beeps the horn. And they're saying, well, he needs to make a left into or right into that restaurant, that building over there and get that moving. And Kimmy basically says, she said, well, I need you to take this time. She's talking to Maurice. And she said, want to make sure that we're on the same page. Because she said, I don't feel like we are. And Maurice said, we are. And she said, well, I'm talking about you going to your brother, letting him know that this is what needs to be done. She said, not that old passive, ha ha hee hee, kikis that you all do. I'm not saying that they kiki him, but she was like, y'all, I guess he jokingly laughs and plays things off because he doesn't want to come across, it's his brother or whatever. And Kimmy's like, this is serious. This is business. I mean, we've promised people that they can have this, at a certain deadline, and we've not met it. And, Maurice is in agreement. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to have a talk with them and things like that. So Kimmy was already dead set against more so getting awarded that job. She already said it in the beginning because he's slow, right? He's slow in everything. But it seems like to me, and I'm paraphrasing, this is my opinion, not paraphrasing. This is my opinion that his personal projects, because I don't see what business projects, we don't see those so much, but his personal projects seem to be taking precedence over his ones that pay the bills. And he basically said that when they talk. He was like, these little projects or whatever that is not making me any money, but he claimed that he's putting the business projects first, but we don't see any progress on that. We see more progress on their personal office spaces than we do anything else. So there's that. So they talk. She was thinking about when she was talking about having events at the building. She was like, and I hope they would be better than, of course, Lance's party. She said it didn't seem like it was that many people there, and she said it was more of us than his actual friends. And I don't know why she even had to mention that, but she threw a little shade. And then she was saying, how Nell got upset, overwhelmed about, the whole Fletcher losing his or having his license revoked and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, I think Maurice was basically saying, well, we don't really know all the details about that. Because, and Kimmy says, well, me being a broker, I know kind of how that process is supposed to go. And she basically says anybody can call and say anything, but there's things in place for for them to kind of investigate and give you a chance to kind of correct it before, that's like the last resort for your license to be revoked. She said, because they give you a chance to, fix whatever it is. And she said, at the most, so you don't lose your license, you may have to pay a fine. She said, but it had to be something really, really bad. She said it had to be something really, really bad for it to be revoked because that's like the last resort. And so in the confessional, Kimmy goes, I would wholeheartedly. If it was to help, if I could help, I would. She said, but it would require, you know, the Fletchers to be transparent. But that was a dig. That was a dig because the Scott 1.0 and 2.0 are not playing fair this episode, this season. But that was a dig. If y'all can go back, remember the whole thing last season was about Nell wanting the Scotts to be transparent regarding the interview that Martell had with that girl. Him and Ariane, interviewed that girl supposedly that went out to Vegas. And she was saying that they weren't being transparent about how they really felt and all that kind of stuff. Now, all of a sudden, when it's coming to Chris's livelihood, they're saying, oh, the Fletchers need to be more transparent. That's why I'm calling this episode really Petty 101. Now, to me, that's apples and oranges. Again, I didn't see anything wrong with how Nell came at them about being transparent about the Harry Hines girl. I don't know why I call Harry Hines. I think somebody else calls her Harry Hines. Shout out to On the Rocks with Jada. I think that's her name. And she, but now they're saying, but again, they're talking about this transparency. They're saying the Fletchers are always in other people's business and they're not transparent about their own. I feel like Kimmy was being very messy and petty. I don't trust her and I don't trust Letitia. Letitia was being little, oh yeah, want to be a friend, blah, blah, blah. Kimmy's talking about, oh, I'll help Fletcher, but he has to be transparent. To me, I'm sorry, it don't fly. I'm not buying it. But the Scotts are being shady and messy. So the next scene was Tisha and Marceau. They're in the park bike riding. They stop. They talk about Ken and Trish. They're not really knowing what's going on there. Tisha tries to, downplay the fact that um that Trisha was in Lance's DMs. She was like, I don't think it was all that. She had some heart face emojis or something, and she had a licky face. And Marcel said that was not a licky face. She said, yeah, it was. She said, but she said she fat fingered it. She said, but they told her she could have deleted it, but she was like, it wasn't a big deal or whatever. So they kind of downplay that. And then Marcel was like, well, Ken is always making excuses for Trisha, and so basically he was saying both of them, they were both saying that, nobody knows what's going on between them two or what have you. And then they start talking about Nell and Chris. And again, the word transparent comes up with Marcel. And he was like, Chris hasn't said anything to us. And, the Fletchers are always in other people's businesses and they don't know how to be transparent with their own and all this kind of stuff. He said, I think I'm going to have a talk with him or something to that effect. And I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. So the next scene, you see that Marceau calls Fletch out to his place of business and he's showing him, their office buildings and how they're, I guess they're coming along or whatever. And even Fletcher picks up on it. He was like, he calls me out there under the guise of like, he's being concerned. He said, but they're not concerned. He said he felt like it was more so them poking at him and trying to, like, look at you. You have licenses revoked and all this kind of stuff. Because he said, well, Marceau, he did come at him like, you're supposed to be a pillar of the community and you're supposed to let people know. And Fletcher's like, no, am I supposed to get on the bullhorn and let everybody know that my license has been revoked? He was like, no, not everybody. Marcel said, no, not everybody, but me. He said, me and you were supposed to be doing business together. And Fletcher said, well, we didn't sign no contracts. And he said, we met over a year ago. And I haven't heard from you since then. We have no businesses or business contracts together. So, and I get that part me personally, I get that. I get what Flush was saying. If it had would have affected him, then yes, then he was obligated to tell Marceau that no, we can't do this right now because got something going on or whatever. Then yes, he was obligated to do it then. But he said all we ever had was a conversation, and that was the end of it. They talked about doing things together, but even at that meeting, because they showed a flashback of that, Nell said, "Well, you have a reputation of being slow and not finishing your projects." So so they go back and forth, and I, for one, see the pettiness in Marceau, and it's looked like they just want to throw it back. They want to throw it back at the Fletchers, and this is not good. But and at the same token, though, when Fletch goes back to talk to Nell about his conversation with Marceau, Nell's basically saying, "Well, to a degree," she said, "Marceau's not wrong. As far as having to tell him about your status of your license, no, clearly you don't owe him anything. But she said you do owe, the public an obligation." So she was like, "Oh, so you met Marceau and you got the real Marceau." And she was like, and at the same token, she's like, "Well, I can kind of understand where Marceau was going." She said, "Because I've kind of said the same thing to you too." And Chris said, "Yeah." And she said, "And I'd be a hypocrite if I would say, Marceau was wrong or whatever." She said, "But I kind of agree with Marceau." But Chris basically says, I understood Chris' explanation too. He was like, "I don't feel like he was coming from a good place. He felt like he was poking." And he was. He was poking. So that was the end of that scene. And then the last scene, which was kind of interesting, it had the brothers talking. And evidently, Marceau, no, Maurice reached out to Marceau. Evidently, he was on live talking about his Scott Manor. And I guess all the progress that's come of it. Now, mind you, him and Kimmy just had this um, conversation about their restaurant not being done. And so he, I guess this is an opportunity to say, "Okay, yeah, you doing all this good work on Scott's Manor, but our restaurant is still sitting there. Not no work is being done on it." So Marceau basically says the reason why nothing's happening, his excuses were that they keep making a change, and every time you make a change, you need a new plan, you need a new, uh, um, you need new, I guess, blueprints or something like that. That's what I'm thinking. Every time they make a change to something, it expands and it pushes the project out more. And so, um, Marceau is not trying to hear it. No, not Marceau. Maurice is basically saying, "You're making excuses. Um, what do you need from me? Let me help you." And so initially, Marceau said, "I don't need anybody help. I can do it myself or whatever, but I'll get on it or whatever." And then he said, "A matter of fact, yeah, since what's your experience? You know about this stuff." She said, "I need you to get out your soft hands era." And he was like, "Soft hands? What do you mean?" So, Kimmy said that earlier in the season. And I guess that hit a nerve. And so he was like, "Well, you know what? I know how to motivate people." Well, all in all, the end of the conversation, Marceau or Maurice was threatening that he might have to sue him to motivate him because he's a year behind in making this restaurant get underway. And so Marceau gets mad and says, "Okay," because they had to drive up this mountain to see what was up there. So Maurice starts walking off. He was like, "Well, okay, well, find your way back down the hill." He said, "I am. I'm leaving." He said, "No, no, no, no. I don't want you to follow my property. Let me take you. Let me give you a ride back." He said, "No, no, no. I'm gone." He said, "But I'm gonna start motivating you." He said, "Well, I'm gonna take care of it. I'm gonna take care of it." And he called him a slimy lawyer. I mean, it was getting real bad, right? But it'll be interesting how Letitia and Kimmy kind of do this thing, right? I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go because Letitia is all about her man. But maybe they won't get involved with the brothers. I don't know. We'll see. But that's basically it. But I feel like this episode was talking about transparency and the Scots trying to get back at the Fletchers. Because that whole thing with Nell saying that Tisha and Kimmy weren't transparent about how they really felt about the interview with the girl, with that Martell interview, Martell and Ariane interview, they're throwing the transparency word back in their face now when it comes to Chris Fletcher's license. And it must be something serious because Chris is talking about he's got lawyers looking into it and it might take a year up to 2 years before he can even get back his license. So that's crazy, especially if what Kimmy was saying is true. Like, they have different things in place for you not to lose your license, but if you're doing something to violate, at the most, you might just have to pay a fine. But if they're revoking it altogether, something had to be majorly wrong. But according to Fletcher, it wasn't anything like that. He called us out looking out for a friend. And the crap must have backfired. I don't know. Don't know him, wasn't there. And as of today, as we know today, his license is still revoked. And this, as you know, was filmed a long time ago. So as of still today, he still doesn't have a license. So I don't know what happened, but it was clearly not a good decision on his part. Must have went against all ethics, like went out the door. Anyway, y'all, please like, share, and subscribe. Y'all, if y'all want to meet down in the comments, let's talk about it. Please like, share, subscribe. Everyone be blessed. Peace.